but there's some unique problems that came with it, and really, I'm not trying to get on. I'm not trying to get on the buzzwords of COVID-19 and branding and stuff. It's real things that have happened. I did a fairly significant amount of academic work as well. So I'm not only the president of the High Tech Crime Investigators Association chapter for Philadelphia, I'm also a graduate professor at Chestnut Hill College. So I do a lot of work, do a lot of academic work, publishing threat intelligence, threat analysis, open source intelligence gathering, what have you, on threats and whatnot. So, um, kind of getting into this and really starting to talk about this. What I want to talk about today, and this presentation is timed out. It's a little bit longer than the time allotted. So what I'm going to do is give you guys my slide deck, and I'm going to speed things up a little bit. There's going to be some slides where I'll say, hey, you can pick this up later. I just want to show you this. Usually, most of the stuff is links or additional sources of information you can go to. Um, to look at some of the things I've talked about or whatnot. I don't want to take all your time up with going, hey, here's a website you should look at. So really what we're going to talk about today is a couple of things. We're going to identify what zero trust is and understand exactly how it works. And zero trust is a very important concept. It's a little bit of marketing pitch that some people in the security industry have kind of put out, but it's a real solid strategy for how you should be running your business now, particularly in the times of COVID and working remotely and what have you. We're going to talk about identifying weak and vulnerable users because the bad guys already have. And it's, as you said, it's an astronomical amount of money they make. And wait till you see how easy it is. We're going to talk about enhancing monitoring controls, thinking about the off ramp for COVID. One of the problems we have, even before all this happened, was we make all these decisions, or all of us as technologists are tied to the industry. We've had clients where they said, "Oh, we just did that in a rush, and it just became something we ended up doing, and it never got taken out again." And that's what, and from a security perspective, what enables me to break companies open, wide open, really quickly. Hey, we just put that in. We didn't know the password was admin, or all these other crazy things that happen. And we never designed an off ramp for these things. Even worse now in the times of COVID, where everybody had to go and basically go remote for at least a significant amount of time, if not have still remained remote. And it was done March 11th to March 15th. It was done so fast, and people said, get everybody get remote, what have you. Nobody really planned what would happen if we had to bring operations back in, much less how are we going to secure data that's going out the door or coming back in again. So you have to start thinking about that. If you've heard me speak a million times, you've heard me say this every single time. Begin with the end in mind. Think about where you're going, row in that direction, and ignore everything else, because those are the things that really end up dooming companies. And we're talking a little bit about identifying vulnerabilities in your systems. So what I'm going to give you over the next 30 minutes is, we have done a lot of consulting, a lot of academic work, proactive, reactive, incident response, penetration testing, forensics work, all from things that have happened during the last year or so. And I'm going to identify a couple of these, or these are questions that clients have had for us that we've had to repeatedly answer about working from home, the security implications of that, and what can we do? So the question you should be asking yourself from a work from home perspective, particularly in the time, again, with COVID and having everybody working from their house, these are the questions you should be asking that don't seem like they're information security questions, but they really are, and the things you should be thinking about. Are your children or other people in your house or domicile or residence or wherever you're using it, using the computer you are using every day for work or accessing company corporate data? And are they installing software on it? Really good example of this. Everybody's kids play Minecraft. How many people know that kids download Minecraft mods into Minecraft, which has a Java virtual environment in some cases, or a code environment, and bad guys likes to seed those things with malware. Things like that, all of these games that offer customizations, what have you. Or if your kids are just, relatively young, don't know what they're doing, running around installing software or using things or signing into websites and whatnot, and that ends up introducing a lot of vulnerabilities and can cause things like ransomware attacks and whatnot. Is the network they're sitting on secure? Do they have controls in place on their workstation? Did you issue them a laptop or computer, or is it BYOD? You say, hey, are they operating over wireless? Did you put out policies that say they should be on wireless or wired in? And how do you know to check? Can you check or monitor their endpoints to make sure that's happening? Can you provide attribution and non-repudiation? What does that mean? If you have an insider problem, malfeasance, negligence, what you name it, can you, when they're working remotely, be able to say, hey, they did or did not do something on that workstation or on their endpoint with that data? which gets even more interesting because if they own the machine, if it's BYOD, you are going to have some very serious legal problems, including having to either request or subpoena access to their computer, even though your data resides on it because they own the asset, unless you provided some sort of policy. Can you identify malicious traffic and react to it when it's not inside the building? So if you have people who are working remotely over the VPN or what have you, or accessing via RDP or terminal services, that is a very popular means for bad folks to get into your network. If this person, and this is, people have said, heard me say this too. My joke, and you'll see it in my book next year because I have a book coming out, and I say the higher, the higher in the food chain you are, if your name is on the side of the building, if you're sitting in a C office, the likelihood that your password is password or you are not listening to security controls is very, very high. It's inversely proportional to where you are in the organizational chain. Where, again, proverbially, the person with the name on the building typically says, I don't have to obey any of these things. I'm the person that owns the company. It doesn't really work that way. And if they don't comply, what can you do to make sure that they are safe? And more importantly, are we prepared for the long game? And what do I mean by that? Get into that in a second. How do we really securely reintegrate and formalize? That's the best question we have to ask ourselves is, here's the things you have to think about. Even before all this happened, there were and are impending regulations and regulatory compliance issues, legal considerations, the California Consumer Privacy Act, which everybody seemed to have forgotten about because it happened. It went in act. It was enforced in the right beginning of COVID, and a number of other things. They're impending. They're going to happen if they haven't already. So if you think you had a problem managing your information security perimeter and programs before all of this, now we have a significant amount of the workforce that is totally outside of your domain of control. How many people are printing things out on their printer at home? That's company data. Are they shredding it before they turn it out? Are you keeping any log of their access? These are the things you have to worry about. Again, if people are handling data offsite, if you're using like ShareFile or SharePoint or another file sharing service, are you scanning that data to see if if malware has been implanted in it, if it's legitimate, if people aren't tampering things, all these other things? And at the end of this, if we go back to working in an office, you're going to have to bring that all in and vet that data and re-engineer those processes. By that count, that's twice as much work as you had before because everybody went back out. You're going to have, and this is a really good opportunity, I think, to retrain your users when they come back in for office work again, to change remember all this process? We said, we can't do that. It's an informal process. Everybody's used to it, what have you. It's been institutionalized. Well, people being out of the office for at least for a couple of months, if not a year or so, or whatever it's going to end up being, this is a really good time because we're going to have to retrain everybody anyway to re-engineer those processes and secure the things that need to be secured. The one thing I say, and you heard me migrating or swimming against the tide a whole lot. I wouldn't say anti-cloud. I was anti the big aggressive push to the cloud for a long time of saying everybody should go to the cloud because it's like anything else. There is this sort of generational swing in IT between the power being on the desktop and the user and the power being into centralized computer and time sharing. And we're swinging back that way again. If you look at that historically over IT, those sort of middle transitions of the pendulum are not where you want to be. Now that we've sort of moved things over and things are reliable and the lumps are out there and we worked a lot of the kinks out, here is your chance. And here is a really good use case to start moving those things to the cloud. 5, 6 years ago, and when this was really a burgeoning sort of growing industry, a lot of people had to take a lot of downtime or issues because the technology and method of access or speed wasn't there yet. Now that we've matured on a little bit and now everybody's sort of forced into that, we now can learn from those mistakes and what worked or didn't work. So here's really something and this is, people hear me say this again. I'm going to be very clear. I am totally apolitical. I have absolutely no interest in politics whatsoever. None of it interests me whatsoever. I am a sort of a law and order, how the sausage is made guy more than anything. So I base my strategic IT and security decisions based on what's written in law and codified or what's being proposed. My undergrad is in criminal law, so I have a very specific interest in it. So reading into the COVID sort of situation, and I wanted to kind of really highlight this. So The congressional proposal, outside of the political part of it, the Republicans are looking for more of a skinny stimulus bill, and the Democrats are looking for something more robust. So when comparing these and sort of putting this together in terms of COVID, I went with what the Republicans are backing as part of their congressional proposal. So they, in their stimulus bill, which proposed a couple of months ago or a couple of weeks ago, says give temporary protection to businesses, schools, and whatnot, basically indemnifying them until December of 2024. And why am I pointing that out? It has nothing to do with the politics of it. The question we have to ask ourselves, are we staying remote, or are we going back to what we quote unquote called normal in January? And I'm going to tell you that it's practically impossible to predict any of this. I do a lot of engagement with people from a number of different industries. I did some work for a think tank, or whatnot, and some for the academic work for the college and whatnot. And it's basically saying nobody has any idea what's going to happen. I say the quote unquote smart money right here. What I mean by that is the people that are fiscally conservative and very litigiously minded, their bet is that 2024 is probably when we're going to get back to normal, or when we go back here about when normal is going to happen. They're asking for indemnity till 2024. So even if we get herd immunity and whatnot, it's going to be, the smart money, the conservative thoughts, not conservative politically, but the conservative thought is 2024 is our best case scenario right now. That makes a lot of economic uncertainty. Plus, if you look at it from are we half pregnant? Are we hybrid? Are we remote? Are we in the office? What have you? It ends up being at least dual resource commitment. It's impossible. You're asking companies that are economically impacted, probably making less money than they are before, to now dedicate probably twice as much money to solving these problems that were forced upon you that we didn't really get the plan for. Again, we can barely manage to stay secure when things are normal. The question we have to ask is this the quote unquote new normal? And is there a need to choose? I will tell you, there's no need to choose. Zero trust is really what you should be looking at. And it's something that we've been talking about for, like I said, it's a relatively new term, but the basic concepts are the same. The question you ask yourself is this: if your users are on their personal computer or remote due to COVID, how do you manage them? How do we simplify reintegration? And how do you manage the new normal? And you say, that's 5 different problems at once. It's going to be very difficult to deal with. The answer is you treat everything as if it is untrusted. That way you don't have to manage multiple scenarios. You don't have at least dual resource commitment. And what do I mean by that? Zero trust, I will flat out tell you, I'm not the person who came up with it. I'm a bit of an iconoclast in my industry. People know me as a guy I'm like very blunt, and I don't like the marketing buzzword stuff. Zero trust is mostly marketing pitch. If it sounds familiar, I've told you a lot of this. You've heard some of this from people before, but the basic concept is this: treat all network traffic, all user activity, all user devices, all servers, what have you, as if they're untrusted, because you can't trust them. They're sitting outside of your network perimeter at some point. This plain and simple fact is, your users and the people, employees of your company at this point, are spending a significant amount of time, a majority of their time, probably operating on your network with your assets, exposing you to risk more times than they are not. It's a simple fact. So what do we really do? One of the things we want to do is implement what we call least privilege, which is restricting their access to internal network assets. So if, for example, if you have a VPN, they can only access the things that they should be accessing on the VPN specifically. Anything they don't need explicit rights to or access to from anywhere, whether it's inside your network or out, it follows the least privilege model. This reduces risk of ransomware and malware spread. One of the biggest ways ransomware spreads, network-based ransomware, is somebody does something bad, infects a computer, opens an attachment, what have you, and that ransomware starts propagating across the network, copying itself across the network to all the things that user can access. Because that user may access files or executables that other users can access, that's how it spreads. Because what happens is somebody else goes to that share, opens that document, opens that file, opens that email, it infects their computer, and then the ransomware takes off again and starts looking at all the things that ransomware can start, or that instance can start accessing at that user. And then you get the pop-up that says, send me $100,000 in Bitcoin or you're screwed, effectively. And it's a really big problem. Even worse in the times of COVID is that bad guys know, one, that people are remote, which makes them easier to trick. Two, you're in desperate times financially. Three, if you look at something like the Phil Abundance problem announced yesterday, Phil Abundance got ransomware for $1 million. I will bet you they were targeted because they were a nonprofit that needed high availability and they couldn't afford to be down for very long. I don't know that. I don't know anything more about it than what was in the news, but that's where that probably led. And I will tell you, if it's not the case there, it's the case in many. You'll see many hospitals or manufacturers or whatnot being compromised or ransomed, and this is how they do it. It's why they do it. That's why you see news stories every day about how adversarial countries and advanced persistent threats and cyber warfare are targeting supply chain and anything to do with the COVID vaccine research, distribution, whatnot. We're in the middle of a cyber war. We always have been, but it's a lot more pronounced now. Zero trust also, we have multi-factor. We have very strict device and access control, which means we're very conscientious about what we're letting access even our network, much less the assets on it. And here's the important part. It's really easy to adopt during COVID, and you should be doing this already with remote users. Not even should, you probably are doing this already with remote users. You just don't know you're doing it. If they're signing into a VPN or going into an RDP environment and accessing from there, you've already got most of this down already. And here's what I have to stress. I hate marketing pitch, and I'm the first person that just kills marketing pitch buzzwords or whatever. And I'll say this, in this instance, just because it's pitch does not mean it's a bad thing. It's a good thing. I'm glad that this is what's going to be marketed real heavily. So why would you want to implement it? Quite frankly, you're going to be forced into it eventually. I hinted to you earlier about impending regulations and standards and whatnot. I'm telling you right now, within 5 years, you're going to be forced into this regardless of your industry. It works really well. You're already doing it with remote workers. And here's something I really want to highlight now. I'm going to keep referencing this. The rules of engagement between adversaries and threats are going by the wayside. Again, the cyber warfare landscape and the hacking landscape and the cyber attack landscape is very commingled now because some of the people, and I say something later slide, that are working for foreign adversarial governments or operating as sort of assets for them to attack our assets, other assets, what have you, when they're not attacking on behalf of a government or force, a regular force, they are probably committing cybercrime for their own gains. Some of those groups, Russia's known to do this, will use ransomware just to raise money for their own operations. It's not cheap doing this stuff. North Korea, one of their, I believe it's at the top, if not one of their top domestic industries, I know it's the case in Nigeria, is computer fraud. North Korea funds a lot of their activities by performing bank fraud. They're one of the most prolific fraudsters of banks out there. There's some other things to get into. It's going to reduce your management and security. Integration of complementary controls is straightforward. We're really talking about microsegmentation and the move to IPv6, which are the driving factors in it. Again, reduce budget. And the question I always ask myself, particularly when I used to be an IT engineer and consultant, I always say this. If you don't have the time or money to do any of this correctly now, how are you going to have to do it to clean up the mess and then fix it during a cyber incident? If you think, engaging Eric, engaging other people like Candoris or whatnot is expensive now, what I will tell you is that IR rates, emergency IT rates, and breach notifications and a lot of other things are infinitely more expensive. My profession, and I'll be one of the few times I'll ever tell you, I'll be one of the few people that ever tells you that a way to, I don't want to see you business-wise. I don't want anything bad to happen to you because that's usually when I run into my clients. And the hard and cold facts of it is this: over my metrics of my career of doing this for 20 years or whatnot, for every dollar you don't spend now, it turns into about $10 to $20 later that you're going to pay from either one, fixing the problem to begin with, cleaning the problem up, doing the investigation, remediating, all these other things. What I will tell you now is that being proactive, particularly in security, is absolutely crucial. That gray space where people don't fix problems, or they say it's going to save me 30 seconds of time or whatnot, is where I live, where the bad guys live, and why my job is so easy. I want you to make my job hard. There's a couple things that we do very specifically that make it very easy. For example, unsupported software within your environment. Identifying it, knowing where it is, and getting rid of end of life stuff is vitally important. I literally get instant kills. I get inside a network, and within 5 minutes, I own, meaning I am commander in chief of everything in the network within 5 minutes, because people do things like leave Windows 7 running in their environment. Ask yourself this: do you know what the exploit SIGRED is? Have you patched your network for it? If you can't answer that, I'm going to tell you, you probably have one of the biggest holes out there sitting on your network that is exploited all the time. Another one I call is the patch trap, which is you can download and install updates for your system. This one's a Microsoft update, but if you read the fine print, it says, okay, you may have patched for this very big issue, but you also have to do a manual registry key alteration and then reboot to get this to work. If you go back and scan this with or look at it manually with a low grade or free tool, it's going to tell you that this has been attached and fixed, patched and fixed. But if you go back and look at it, it really has not. It gives you a false sense of security. So there's a couple of things you can do to really relate this. And like I said, back in 2012, I said that the cloud is great for certain things. I, for many years, have been arguing about, hey, pump the brakes, new technology, let's not run into it yet. There are a lot of things that the cloud is now great for, and here's a couple of them. And I'm not patch management, vulnerability scanning, remote security monitoring, threat hunting, endpoint management, and secure information management during COVID. There's a bigger list than that that goes beyond the sort of the realm of information security. I'm just giving you the things that are relevant and what we're really here to talk about. So, this is really one of those things. Secure information management. What does that mean? Document management portals, document execution portals, exchange of files, whatnot. There's a lot of really good products out there for that. Same thing with project management software or task software, those sort of things, where business processes. One, it's really good for managing people remotely, especially particularly in a secure manner. Two, it's really good for regulatory compliance, where you're going to have to track a lot of these things and access for people, or for things like OSHA and whatnot. Again, this makes it really easy. This isn't just, like I said, it's not just computer security management, it's really information management. If you are an organization that has to follow HIPAA guidelines, or ISO 27001, or NIST 17153. There's all these different ones that are out there, and you say, listen, I have to follow these things. Doing this now, particularly when you have a documentation and people are used to it with an electronic solution, makes it a lot easier when they come back in again. Good example of this is a Exchange remote code execution bug, CVE 2020-0688. What I'm not going to go through is the technical details of this, but what I'm going to tell you is it is highly exploited in the wild, will allow an attacker to very quickly and easily become the domain administrator with system privileges on your Exchange server within about 5 minutes. It's very easy to find. It's very easy to exploit. It's totally script driven, which means I can give it to anybody on earth and they can run it against an Exchange server and they will become the domain administrator or the system. These are two very specifically powerful accounts in Windows. The domain administrator has rights over everything in the corporate domain. System privileges is an account you can't even sign into. It's above the domain administrator. It means you are operating effectively as the Windows operating system itself. There's no security control over you at that point. It thinks it's Windows. It's not going to fix anything. It's highly exploited in the wild. I will tell you, the reason I'm specifically pointing this out is because I have had a huge amount of cases come in the last year related specifically to this. The way that a bad guy can do it is very easy. It's by phishing, stealing your credentials, or credential stuffing. You guys not changing your passwords on other sites that have been compromised. If you want to read more about it, Red Canary and DFDR teamed up. Red Canary is a very well-known incident response company, offers a wonderful product. We did a blog with them regarding an incident response case we did with them. You can read it right there. So there's a couple of things that I'm going to tell you right now as technologists to patch for. SIGRED is one of the biggest Windows exploits of the year. It allows, basically, it's unpatched DNS flaw that allows, again, a bad guy to spread through your network very quickly as an administrator or as the system. There's the zero net logon vulnerability there. Like I said, I'm not going to go through these in detail just because I want to expedite this a little bit. Mimikatz is the very popular malware password stealing tool used in all ransomware, and it's used and it basically allows you to saw through a network. It's very easy to patch, but nobody patches it. It's a Windows patch. Apply it. Make sure it's applied, and because it makes things extremely easy for me to steal passwords in plain text from your computer's memory. My Cisco, Netgear, Linksys, Dell multi-vendor exploit. You can go to Cyberscoop or Google my name and Cisco in the news. I did a big presentation at ShmooCon, which is one of the world's largest security conferences, and show this off. It is a exploit that affects multiple switches, routers, vendors, infrastructure, what have you, across all of these vendors. So effectively, I discovered this exploit allows you to take over, pull all information off of, and become the administrator of millions of critical infrastructure devices like switches and routers made by Cisco, Netgear, Linksys, Dell, you name it. A lot of them. And I said it's scary because every network I have had to look at since I found this has this present on it. And again, it makes it very easy. I talked about the Exchange static key, and then I have another big exploit this year, put me in the SonicWall Hall of Fame, for a way to turn SonicWall firewalls into a distributed denial of service platform because of their lock-on page. These are things to patch for. I see these all the time. It's the most common things that we're seeing, and really happens. So I keep saying cyber warfare is here. It has always been here, and COVID really amplified it. What I will tell you is to closely review your cyber insurance policies. And there's a great person on this meeting that you should go to talk to about those insurance policies, Austin. Because there are a lot of exclusions or acts that are starting to get excluded from insurance coverage because of a couple of things. One of them is a wartime exclusion, meaning if something is an act of war or can be considered an act of war, they will not cover it unless you have specifically asked for that. Same thing with crime. Now, I referenced something earlier today, or earlier in the presentation, when I said bad guys are starting that are working for adversarial governments, APT groups, or what have you, or what we classify as terrorist organizations or state-sponsored terror organizations. When they attack you or your company, how are you able to tell me that they were after money and it wasn't an act of war, such as accessing things for the purposes of whatever? You can't provide me any high confidence attribution as to the motive of any particular attacker. Now, if you go through and do the incident response investigation or what have you, and we say, well, this is a known IP address or known malware used by Fancy Bear, by Cozy Bear, by Black Energy, any of these other APT groups that we know to be state associated, that's what's starting to come down. They'll say that's a wartime exclusion because that's a group we think is tied to a foreign military intelligence organization. Crime ones are the same way. It's a really scary world you live in. Not only that, many industries are now considered what we call critical infrastructure. And there are several executive orders from the Obama administration, the Trump administration, and I guarantee the Biden administration is going to do this too, which is advising companies and organizations that say, here is the list of critical infrastructure organizations and industries, which I guarantee you're probably a part of. And here's the things we are suggesting that you do. Whenever you see a suggestion via a government mandate or regulation, that usually means within 5 years it's becoming law or required. That clock already started. I can guarantee you it's happening. I think it's going to come as part of any infrastructure bill that is proposed in the new session of Senate and Congress. So again, adversaries blur the lines, and attribution is really difficult. Again, wartime exclusions problem. We have collateral damage. International tensions and escalation put us in the crosshairs because it's a lot harder to attack the United States government or particular agencies as opposed to making a political statement or big deal against organizations. We do it all the time. We impose sanctions on organizations that are known to be tied to, or we attack organizations that are known to be tied to. Adversaries do the same thing. So a lot of this is turning into collateral damage. A good example of that is look at the NotPetya attacks or the Petya attacks. They were ransomware a couple of years ago that were put out using another different huge Microsoft vulnerability, similar to the ones I described before. And that was designed to look like a ransomware attack, and it was just targeting the Ukraine on Ukraine Independence Day. But what happened was they kind of miscalculated a little bit, if you will. If you've ever seen the movie Office Space, where he screws up and it ends up causing a lot bigger problem, same thing happened where the malware escaped the Ukraine and ended up in a whole lot of other places, and that caused a lot of collateral damage. Go back through that a little bit. Look at what happened in litigation. Your jaw's going to drop when you see what happened. And again, desperate times call for desperate measures. COVID research hacking is a big one. Look at everybody remember a couple of weeks ago where Tesla, they had an incident with Tesla where the Russian government and espionage agencies approached a Russian-born Tesla employee and asked them to implant via USB drive ransomware inside the Tesla network. Did anybody know about that? Scary. Again, what does Tesla have to do with international espionage and COVID and a bunch of other things? You say, well, on the surface, ostensibly not much, but when you get into it, like I said, there's a lot that goes into it, and you don't really think about that. Well, this is one of those slides I said I'm going to skip over. These are threat intelligence feeds. If you want to keep up on what's the newest things happening in cybersecurity, some intelligence, see where things have happened, these are all different. MITRE is a vulnerability research thing. You can look up the FDR, my names. Anybody else, there's a lot of registered ones. Have I been pwned is a way to check if your credentials or email address and passwords have been leaked to the bad guys. Exploit DB is a technical sort of exploit website where it's like a pirate haven for people like myself who produce and share our code, as well as the bad guys. It's sort of like, here's all the cool stuff we can do and things we found. We're publishing this so everybody knows about it. Hopefully you're fixing it. The cyber threat's a really good one, but I think that one may have been deprecated in the last couple of months. VirusTotal is a really good site where if you think a file or something you've received has malware or malicious code in it, you can actually upload it to VirusTotal. It'll tell you if it's got something in it. And of course, my website, because what presentation would be a presentation without telling people to go to your website? One other thing to go to look at is daily DOS tracking. DOS is denial of service. Bad guys know that you need remote access. So what they started to do was denial of service was more of a nuisance and annoyance thing earlier, where bad guys would attack your website or your network just to bring you down and harass you or whatever. Since we're getting really good at stopping software-based ransomware, and COVID happened, which meant everybody needs to access their VPN, their website, their email, what have you, the bad guys figured out, well, why don't we take DOS software and bring people's networks down so that nobody can work or obtain remote access to their company assets. So what that ended up doing really is turning DOS into a ransomware vector. If you want to see this happen in real time, in real life, every single day, go look at this website called Digital Attack Map. It is a live view of all the known and like happening at this moment in time cyber attacks that are happening in real time, who's attacking who, when they're attacking. It's a fascinating thing. It's an interactive website. Like literally, this is from April 16th, one of the biggest cyber attacks in history for DOS vectors. You can see it right here. So the biggest risks we have with COVID, again, we have the ones we see quite a bit of: wire transfer and payment scams, credential stuffing, social engineering vectors, ransomware, remote access attacks, things we've talked about a lot. Credential stuffing. That is a method of the bad guy. If you go to a site like Have I Been Pwned or what else, if you've ever been on a website that's been compromised and hackers got the passwords and email database, they publish them out on the internet. The reason they do that is they decrypt it. And my applied cryptography students actually did this. If somebody wants to speak up about it, we did this in class where we took leaked LinkedIn credentials from the last couple of years, people's actual email addresses and passwords. We went through, we decrypted their passwords and showed it in real time. This is what the bad guys do. They say, hey, LinkedIn or whatever these other websites are, people reuse passwords. They reuse the same password on everything and a lot of other problems. So they go find all the passwords you've used on other websites. They try to find out where you've worked for remote access, more cloud services, things like that. Do you access Office 365, what have you? Sometimes they'll send you a phishing email. They'll get you, or they'll trick you, or just plain out use your password, get into your computer or your email box or whatever, what have you, and start committing crime. Now, how do they find you? Why are you interesting? Because companies do lots of things like advertise their company bios and social media postings, and they tell the bad guys exactly who to target. You guys do a very good job of advertising your job roles, what you do, information you have access to, all these other things that make it very easy. If people are
We have
reusing
about,
passwords,
excuse me,
sorry, go
Ken,
ahead.
we have about 2 minutes
Yep,
left for the presentation, if you don't mind. Yep.
no problem.
Thank you.
You got to really think about what you're advertising, what you're sending out there. This is Hush Puppy. Hush Puppy was one of the biggest proponents of business email compromise. He was arrested in Dubai in June because all this person did was business email compromise and tricking people to perform wire transfer payments. You can look the article up. He was caught personally with $40 million in cash on him. They caught him through his Instagram account because he was living some ridiculous life, spending all the money. And that's how I don't, like I said, we only have 2 minutes. I want to kind of skip through this. Make sure you're securing your remote access. Don't let any IP addresses from outside the country access your VPN, your RDP, what have you. Implement multi-factor and stop linking to vital systems for convenience. On your company website, don't have a thing that says click here for our file sharing service or click here to remotely access your desktop. It's a bad idea. How do you stop phishing? During COVID, depending on who you're reading it from, phishing attacks went up 100 to 4,000%. Be very careful handling documents and files. Don't store anything in email. If you have a company portal or share file or whatever there is, use that. Email gets popped, and that's what the bad guys go after. If there's nothing in email to compromise or encrypt, you are stopping them from doing it. Another thing to do is screen emails for keywords and interest grabbers like vaccine and politically charged rhetoric. That hook, that psychological hook, is what gets them people to be their interest and gets them to do bad things. On host controls, very straightforward things you should normally do: antivirus, application control, what have you. Big one is this: the shadow IT trap. Design an off ramp. Anything that is in for right now, as we call it during COVID, is what causes security issues later. Because in 2 years, how many people are going to remember that we put a wireless access point in the ceiling so everybody could work socially distanced? How many people here are IT professionals that find that stuff in the ceiling years later? Happens all the time. Move to virtualization and hosting for your devices like published desktops, VDP, remote access. The cloud is awesome for this. The advantage to this is if I have a virtualized host environment, VDI, RDP terminal services, I don't need 100 hardware upgrades now, and we don't need downtime to patch computers. That is why the cloud is awesome now, because we finally got to the point where this trade-off is finally advantageous for you. Subscription-based devices and cloud managed assets can reduce your overhead. What does that mean? If this is all going to be temporary, if we're coming back out of this in 2021, signing a 2-year contract or buying hardware when you think you're coming back in 12 months is a really bad idea. Buying a perpetual license, all these other things. So if you're going to do a subscription base, you can pay by month, you can do installation, you can do a cloud managed asset. That's a really smart financial decision, but it also allows you flexibility next year that if you want to go back to on-premise or what normal is, it's very easy for you. I also like managed vulnerability scanning and application scanning. We'll talk about that later. 2 other things to worry about. I'm sorry if I'm going to go, if you allow me 2 more minutes, because these are very important. Equipment sourcing. You'll be the first person to tell me, and next year you can shake my hand and say, what a great look, Ken. Equipment sourcing is going to be a humongous problem next year. You're already starting to see this with popular media. Has anybody noticed that television networks are now airing Canadian television and a couple of other things? Because the production of things that would normally come out now really stopped in the beginning of the year. Not only that, most of our equipment that we receive in the technology industry, while they are assembled in certain other places, there are literally only 3 real fabrication facilities in the world for computer RAM and a bunch of other things. They also happen to be foreign to the US and are highly affected by COVID, much less trade between countries. So I will tell you, I guarantee you, because I work with a lot of people on this, Q1 and Q2 of next year, the prices on computer equipment, consumable computer products, RAM, things like that are going to skyrocket. If you don't believe me, look at the tsunami and hurricane problem they had. I believe it was in 2009 to 2010 in Southeast Asia. If anybody has been around for that long, do you remember the shortage of hard drives that we had, and that you were literally could not buy hard drives in any store for like 6 or 7 weeks? It's the same idea. But think about it now. because it's even worse. Future waves, one of which we're already going through right now, will affect the supply chain. And that's not even considering other possible future events like uh, financial or trade wars with foreign countries that produce this thing. We have a switching administration, we have switching governments all over the world, some of which may not be too friendly to each other anymore. Are there field serviceable parts and will you be replacing them? If there's field serviceable parts in your equipment, is it smarter now to pay Dell or HP or a managed service provider to do the field servicing to keep your employees safe and shielded from COVID? Is that a viable thing? I think sometimes it is. And again, these production uncertainties are going to drive up pricing. Last thing I will tell you, the other thing I get asked quite a bit about is how do we practice secure and sterile IT practices now? One, invest in a phone and tablet sterilizer, particularly if you're an IT person. This is why the reason I'm really bringing up this. What's the procedure for secure IT work, particularly when you're sterilizing or people are around? Example here, drop off the laptop. The employee drops off laptop, provides a chain of custody document. This takes 2 minutes, and trust me, it will save you huge amounts of problems. IT doesn't get their password. They don't provide their password to the IT people. The IT people change their password, like in a domain, record the date and time that did this, does their work on the PC, sets the account to say next login, change password, or they have the user reset the password there, and then they give it back to the user. The reason this is a really good thing, remember I said about non-repudiation and making sure users, we can track people. This makes sure that nobody gives up their password and we can track all activity. Endpoint management products, like ones that are produced by MSPs, such as Kaseya, LabTech, SolarWinds, a bunch of these others, are really good for doing remote IT support and keeping people safe. Same thing, doing administrative tasks through VDI, alternative accounts, what have you, really smart sterile IT practices that are going to keep you safe. That is all I have. Thank you for letting me go for an extra 5 minutes. I wanted to make sure I got there every slide.
Oh, thank you, Ken. I really appreciate that. I'd give you like a virtual round of applause here.
Thank you.
And, I see lots of other folks doing the same thing. So thank you very much. I'd like to turn it over for some question and answer from the audience, if I could. I see Austin has a question. Austin, would you like to ask your question live? Oh, you're on mute, sir. There you go.
Now I'm back. Ken, can you hear me, Ken?
Yes, I can, sir.
Good. You said that we're in the middle of a cyber war. I completely agree.
Oh, yeah.
Please give the audience some examples of the cyber war. Let them understand what we're really facing versus people saying that. Tell them how we are in a cyber war from your experience.
Well, let me
I have a couple of different areas of expertise here.
Yeah, let me interrupt, Ken. Let me interrupt if I could to piggyback on Austin's questions there. I recently saw the HBO.
Hey there, I can't hear you.
Perfect. Oh, there we go. I recently saw the HBO documentary Perfect Weapon, and I was just curious how that ties in with all that. Oh,
I lost audio. Hold on a second.
There we go. We can still hear you.
We can hear you, Ken. And Eric, I can hear you just so.
Okay, sorry, I can hear. Go ahead. Sorry, my bad.
No, that's okay. So Austin asked his question. I was wondering, the HBO documentary that recently came out, The Perfect Weapon, which kind of weaved together a lot of how social media ties into hacking and nation state hacking in particular. I'm just curious how that all fits in, because it's very real.
Trying to think of the best way. Because like I said, I wear a couple of different hats here. So I'm one of the people who does a lot of exploit development and into open source intelligence gathering and work. So what I will tell you is I do.
Oh, I think Ken just froze on us. Unfortunately, we'll see if he comes back. He was distilling too much information for the rest of us. I don't know.
Quite a bit of offensive work, or at least offensive research. Hold on. Can you hear me now?
Yes, you're back.
All right. I don't know what the heck's going on. Sorry. So I wear a couple different hats here, and really, what I'll be frank with is I do a lot of offensive work, if you will, and I will do a lot of defensive work as well. So you can read some of the academic work I've done in terms of analysis of cyber warfare and whatnot. But sort of what Austin's getting at is, how is cyber warfare here today? I gave you an example with the NotPetya attacks of ransomware being weaponized by foreign adversaries to either make money or cause destruction. Tesla is a really good one because, again, that's a foreign government trying to obtain access to that. You can look at things such as, again, a dark energy group with dark energy, black energy is a advanced persistent threat group associated with Russia. The only thing they are concerned with is attacking the energy sector, solar, oil, trying to think of all the other energy sectors. That's all they do. but we're starting to see it. And I'm not even considering, sort of the politically charged rhetoric end of things, but trade wars, corporate espionage. When the government talks about corporate espionage being a big deal, people